We'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure there's a few others probably wander in here, but we'll get rolling. Welcome to the session this afternoon. This is going to be dealing specifically with regenerative grazing. I'm going to start the first session, so this is a two-session deal. The first half of this session, we're going to be talking very specifically about the 6 principles of soil health, because that is absolutely the foundation to good grazing. We've got to understand those 6 principles and how can we appropriately apply those principles to our operations. And then in the second session, we're going to dig deeply into adaptive grazing and what we call the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. Are any of you in here today also coming to the session tomorrow? Okay, a handful. So tomorrow we will go very in-depth, and it'll be a great time. We'll have a lot of time tomorrow to answer specific questions. So for those of you that are coming tomorrow, please feel free to share questions specifically from your operations. Okay, because we're gonna dig into those types of things, and I hope you feel comfortable sharing those with everybody else in the group, because what we have always found is that if you have a problem, guess what? A whole lot of others have it too. Don't think that your problem is unique to you. It rarely is. And as a matter of fact, you know, we work right now in 34 different countries. And what I can guarantee you is that it doesn't matter if we're talking to producers in the UK, in France, in Australia, New Zealand, somewhere in South America, or wherever, inevitably the questions that they bring up to us and the challenges and issues that they have, guess what? They're the exact same things we hear here, Jerry. You know? So it's rarely different anywhere in the world. Almost everybody shares very similar problems. So, the 6 principles, is there any way to dim a little bit these front lights, or? And hopefully that, you tell us if it's going to mess up the video any. Just to get a little bit of glare off the screen. But the 6 principles of soil health. Now, many of you may have heard 4 principles or 5 principles, but what we are doing, we have added at least a couple here, and one in particular. So as we go through these, we're going to take time to talk about each and discuss what they mean. First, we are talking about soil, and soil is the foundation of everything that we deal with. So we have to be cognizant of that. Over the last 8 decades, almost all of us in agriculture have learned to deal with and assess these 2 characteristics of the soil: physical and chemical, and especially chemical, right? All of us are familiar with what we would call a standard soil test. And in that standard soil test, that's what we're getting. We're looking at the chemical, maybe a tick of the physical, depending on how in-depth your standard soil test is. But no mistake about it, it's at least 90% chemistry that we're talking about. But what we have found is that the biological component is by far the most critical component. It's not equal. You know, a lot of times you'll see the 3 circles drawn together in equal proportion and all of that to sort of subscribe to the thought that, well, all of them are equal in their contribution. But that is absolutely not the case. And we have done literally hundreds of thousands of chemical, physical, and soil biological tests across North America over the last 20 years. And what we have found is that the biology is by far the most critical thing here, okay? By far. We have acted within both agriculture and academia, and I am a former academic. I spent 15 years as a university professor and researcher, and so I now call myself a recovering academic. But so I left as a tenured full professor, and I can tell you that, and that was back in the year 2000, and I can tell you that when I left, all of my colleagues, not just some of them, 100% of my colleagues, Hugh, at the university told me I was an ever-living idiot to leave the university. How could somebody with tenure and a full professorship leave academia? And the truth is, yes, in that world, you sort of, quote, got it made, right? Because they can't fire you unless you do something exceedingly stupid. And you got a guaranteed paycheck, guaranteed benefits, on and on and on. And certainly by year 15, I was fully vested. And by the way, we had our last born was a newborn at that time too. And my wife was looking at me like, she was also saying, "Are you an idiot?" Okay? And I assure you, my wife had a lot less trouble saying that to me than my colleagues at the university. Okay? So it terrified her that I was going to leave the university. But I made the decision, and here's why. Because as I delve more and more into what we're going to be talking about today, and I started to understand it more, and I've always been a farmer and rancher. I grew up on my family's farm here in South Carolina, and then ever since, I live in Mississippi now, but ever since I got there, we've had a ranch there and so forth, so I've never not done that, but I never fully understood at that point in time the things that we're going to talk about today. And when it started to gradually come together and click for me, that's when I understood that I had to make a choice, because unfortunately what we were doing in academia was not going to allow me to be able to do this in my professional career. And that was why I made the decision. So that was 22 years ago now, and I can tell you that I have not a single day regretted that decision, because we never could have done what we're doing today within Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy if I had stayed there. But at that point in time, I was just like everybody else. One of my jobs was to read soil tests for all of our producers that would send them into the university, and to interpret them for them and to send that back to that producer. And what was it always about? When I was interpreting a standard soil test, what do you think my recommendations were? Kim, what do you think they might have been? Okay, it was all about N, P, and K, and one other thing, lime, exactly. NPK and lime. And that was the sole everything about what we would tell producers to do. Now, the only problem with, well, there's a lot of problems with that, but what's one of the major problems with that? What did I just tell them to do in my official role as a university professor? What had I just told that rancher or farmer to do? Spend money. Spend money. Well, you know what? It sort of didn't matter at that point because it wasn't coming out of my pocket, right? Okay? And that's how most view it. Well, it's not coming out of my pocket. They need to do it to get productivity. You sort of justify it somehow in your mind. But we were always telling them to spend money. What were we not doing? What was the key thing we were not doing? And I was not doing? Telling them how to fix their real problem. Instead, I was teaching them how to cover it up, how to become dependent on inputs, okay, that were costly and that, oh, by the way, never ever fixed the problem. You just were continually reliant on these inputs. And it wasn't until I started to understand that big circle there, biology. It wasn't until then that it really clicked in my own mind, and I had to make changes on my own ranch because I was doing the same thing I was telling all of these other people to do. So I had to change my thought process just as each of us has to change our thought processes. We call it, instead of changing the way you do things, change the way you see things, okay? Change the way you see things, and then it will become much clearer. So what we now know is this. For 8 decades, we've acted as if chemistry drives everything in the soil. And the majority of soil scientists at most universities will still take that position today. But what I'm going to tell you today is that it is the exact opposite. Biology drives chemistry. And if you fix biology, you will fix the chemistry. It no longer is a problem. And we have seen this over and over again. So what we're going to be focusing on today, by and large, is that big circle, the biology. How do we work with that? What does it entail? What encompasses that biological realm in the soil, and how do we deal with it? How do we work with it? So the first thing that we have to understand is this right here, the big picture. 90% of soil function is mediated or directly related to soil microbial activity. And this soil microbial population also has to be in balance. What we are seeing in the vast majority of farm and ranch soils today globally, not just here in North America, but globally, is that we have a microbial imbalance, and a significant one, a significant microbial imbalance in the soil. So we've got 3 primary classes of microbes that we deal with. We have soil bacteria, we have soil fungi, and then we have the predators of the soil like protozoa, bacterial-feeding nematodes, and that type of thing. So if we look at that, okay, then what are we lacking out of those 3? What are we lacking? Okay. The fungi especially, exactly. We are lacking them. Tomorrow, and I know a lot of you are not going to be in tomorrow's session, but tomorrow I'm going to dig really deep into that. But the fungi are what are lacking, okay? Most of our soils have plenty of what class of microbes? Bacteria. We are bacterially dominant, okay? Bacterially dominant. So what we need is we need to alter that as well. So it's not just about increasing microbes irrespective. It's about increasing them in the proper proportions. So when we look at soil function, for soil to truly function, it's got to be able to do a couple of things here. It's got to be able to capture and store water. And right now across North America, that's not happening very well. The vast majority of soils across North America that we measure and do water infiltration tests on are coming in at less than a half-inch infiltration rate an hour. We want to know why we have so much more flooding now, and we want to know why we have such significant impacts when we have drought. That one problem right there, the inability of our soils today to not be able to infiltrate water. So we've got to solve that problem. And the second one is to cycle nutrients. And that also is a big problem. We've got a lot of binding today of nutrients, elements in the soil. And that's why we're having to have all the add-ons, all the fertilizer, all the amendments, everything else, is because our soil is not able to cycle enough nutrients effectively enough to be able to properly feed the plants that are growing there. And we can fix all of that. So here are the 6 principles, and then we're going to talk about them individually. First and foremost, and that's why we put it in the center, is context. If you do not understand context first and your context, then the rest of them don't matter, because you are not going to be able to appropriately and adequately apply the other 5 principles if you do not understand your context. And that context is not mine. So, Jerry, the context on my ranch is not the context on yours, okay? It's got to be your context that you fully grasp and fully understand. That's the only way that you're going to be able to effectively implement the other 5 principles and the 3 rules that we're going to discuss in the second session. And it's also the only way that if you get somebody like Understanding Ag to come in and help you, that's the only way we can help you. And that's the very first thing we're going to delve deeply into is your context. Because if we don't understand that, we can't help you. So context is critically important. The second is minimize disturbance. And we'll talk about what all that means in a moment. The third is armor on the soil at all times. The fourth is diversity. The fifth is living roots in the ground year-round. And the sixth is animal integration. So those are the 6 principles. So let's take them one by one. Context. Context. First and foremost, your context will be different for every farm and every field. It is not the same. And only you know that. You are the people that know your farms, your ranches better than anybody else, just like I know mine better than anybody else. So you're the person that has to define this. Secondly, context includes a whole host of other things. Your soil, soil types, the health of your soils, your climate, your cropping systems, the equipment that you're using, your labor, your economics, your financials, your history, your ecological perspective, your goals and objectives, and even your beliefs, your family, all of that is included under context, and all is critically important. If you're a family operation, and we've seen this happen over and over, if you're a family operation, and I'm 6th generation, from my family's farm, so I greatly value that kind of heritage. They've been there since 1840. But if you're a family farm, family ranch, and the family is not together on this, it's going to be difficult. That's part of your context. The family has to agree. Family members have to agree in the direction that you're going to go and what you're going to do. You'll get flack often from neighbors, friends who look at you like my former colleagues at Mississippi State University did when I told them I was leaving, and your friends and neighbors will tell you you're an idiot. Why are you doing that, Bruce? What are you thinking? Nobody else around here is doing that. What is going through your mind? You'll get that, okay? And you'll get it from everybody that sells you something, okay? Because they're going to feel threatened that, maybe I won't get as many sales of my chemicals, my fertilizer, my seed, whatever that I'm selling to these folks if they change the way they do things. So you're going to have a lot of people, and even, unfortunately, a lot of times from your lenders. Lenders often are some of the ones that put the quietus on this for people that want to make the transition to regenerative agriculture because they don't understand it either. And they're using a typical university enterprise budget or FinBin data or whatever they may be using, very conventional data. We are now working with Wells Fargo to develop educational programs and supporting materials for ag lenders, not just Wells Fargo lenders, but all ag lenders. So Wells Fargo is being gracious enough to allow all of these educational materials to go out to all ag lenders across North America. So we are working on that now, and over the next 2 years we'll be developing that and getting that into the hand of lenders. So all of that is context, folks, and you've got to understand that, you've got to define it, you've got to recognize it. It helps to write it down. And then you've got to learn that you're going to have to deal with all that extraneous noise from all of the people saying, you're idiots, why are you doing this? So it takes a lot of gumption, a lot of character to do this in a lot of cases. This is a thinking person's game if you're going to do regenerative, and if you're going to do adaptive grazing. It's a thinking person's game, and it absolutely is something that you've got to have thick skin so that you can withstand all the negativity that may be thrown your way over time. But now, we actually love and laugh at the negativity, okay? And that's most of our neighbors, even our next door neighbors. I mean, Kim, Jerry, how long has Gabe been doing this? 30 years. How many of his immediate next door neighbors have changed? Okay? But you know what? We like our next door neighbors because they're our neighbors, but we also like them for 2 reasons. First of all, what was that? That's right. They're a direct fence line comparison for every time we do workshops and have workshops and tours and that kind of thing to our place. So they provide us with an absolute direct fence line comparison that we love because it allows whoever's coming to our workshops to be able to see, boy, this really does make a difference. So we thank our neighbors for that. The other thing we thank them for, our neighbors that are upslope from us, because they can't infiltrate water whenever we get a rain. We infiltrate ours, but we also get theirs as well, okay? So we don't tell them that because they might start charging us for the water that they're losing, but so we love our neighbors. Okay, number 2, reduce disturbance, okay? One of the simple ways to do that is to minimize or eliminate tillage. Minimize or eliminate tillage. That's one of the ways that we can reduce disturbance, but it's much more than that. Haying, quite honestly, we've measured field after field after field after field, and if you've got dedicated hay fields and all of that, they never measure any better than a tilled field. They never do. We think that because we have living roots in the ground all the time, and at least some armor, that type of thing, that, oh, it's got to be better than a tilled field and the biology has to be better. No, it's not. And we think the water infiltration has to be better. No, it's not. So haying repeatedly, dedicated haying over and over in the same fields year after year is pretty much as degrading as tillage. And we can prove that. We've got the data. Now, if you're managing those fields differently, then you can still hay. We still do some hay, all of that. So there's ways to manage that. But Reducing disturbance is more than just reducing tillage. It is reducing haying impact on any one field. It is reducing synthetic applications, reducing chemical use, and reducing a lot of other things that can have a harmful impact. So all of that falls under this reduce disturbance. Dwayne Beck, who many of you probably know at the Dakota Lakes Experiment Station, talking about tillage tools, Dwayne says all tillage tools destroy soil structure, they reduce water infiltration, they reduce organic matter, and they increase weed pressure. And he's right, Dwayne's right. Now, is this to say that there's never ever a time for tillage? No, there can be. The beautiful thing about regenerative agriculture is this, and I want you to hear this. With regenerative agriculture, every tool is still in your toolbox. Every tool. You have not eliminated a single tool. Herbicides are still there. Tillage is still there. Synthetic fertilizers are still there. Okay? So they're all still there. But the question that you have to ask yourself is, how do I use this more judiciously? First of all, do I need to use this tool? Period. Okay? Then, if you think you do, how do I use this tool more judiciously? And then if it's a tool that I know is going to do some damage, like tillage or a herbicide or whatever, and I have to use it, then what is my plan after use of that tool in that same field? What am I going to follow it up with in terms of regenerative practices to be able to repair whatever damage I did and then to continue to progress forward? Now, organic, if you're going to transition to organic, you're immediately eliminating about 90% of the tools in your toolbox, right? Okay, so this is not organic transition. And I want people to understand it. It is regenerative. So with this, you still have all the tools in the toolbox. You just use them much more effectively and efficiently, and only if they're absolutely necessary. Number 3, armor on the soil. So the first thing you need to do is in every field, look down, do you have bare ground? If you've got bare ground, you're lacking armor. Now, we all have dealt with this, and some of us are still dealing with it. Some of us have had exceptional and extreme drought over the past 2 years, and we're dealing with, soil that's not armored. But as much as we possibly can, we want armor on the soil. And we can talk in a bit about strategies. How do you do this? Now, what are the key reasons for armor on the soil? What are we looking to do? Okay, we want to protect our soil temperature. We want to protect our soil moisture. We want to protect our soils from wind erosion, which is very real. And we want to protect our soils from water erosion. Armor on the soil does all those things. So the more we can have that soil covered with living plants or plant residue, the better that soil is going to function in all of those ways. We now know that we can no-till through very heavy residue. We've got, tomorrow I'll be presenting some case studies and showing you video of no-tilling through cover crop stands that are, head high and higher. So we're rolling down and planting directly into thick mats, that 2-foot thick mats, that type of thing, and doing very well with that. So we now know we can do those types of things, and we can no-till directly into that. No cover equals erosion. This is an up-close view of a raindrop. And you can see that when it hits bare soil, you're literally just splattering that soil everywhere, and then of course it's accumulating into that ponding and pooling and then running off. Or if it's not running off, then what is happening? You're getting rapid evaporation, and what's being left behind through rapid evaporation? Salts. We are seeing more and more and more soils today that are becoming heavily salinated because of two things: the lack of armor on the soil and the inability of those soils to infiltrate water. When you combine those two together, guess what happens? You get runoff and soil erosion. You lose nitrogen, you lose phosphorus, you lose topsoil, or you get rapid evaporation and you get salination of the soil. So all of those things are occurring. So the value of cover then side-by-side fields, same day, same time of day, and we've got a significant difference in the temperatures between the field where we had bare soil showing, that was a cornfield, a typical conventional cornfield, and where we've got a nice cover crop field and we've got a lot of shading on the soil. We have seen soils heat up to more than 155 degrees when they're exposed to direct sunlight. Even as far north as the Northwest Territories of Canada, up there we have recorded soil temperatures where the soil was exposed in the summertime on days that were just 75 degrees. Soil temperatures of 130 degrees plus, that far north. So that means none of you here in the U.S. are immune to high soil temperatures. And for those of us that live and farm and ranch in the deep south, we certainly can heat our soils up quite dramatically. And I'm going to show you a chart in a little bit about that. This is using a FLIR thermometer, FLIR camera, forward-looking infrared. This is in a pasture that was conventionally grazed. So in that, what happens when livestock graze conventionally? What happens in a pasture? Okay, you get both overgrazing and undergrazing in the exact same pasture, right? Okay, you get tightly cropped down patches and then they've left tufts here and there. Well, that's what I'm showing you right here. That's what you're seeing. Okay, so in this FLIR camera, the air temp was 96 degrees that day. And if you look at this, where you see the blues, that's where they left stuff. Where you see the oranges and the reds and all of that, that's where they mowed it down with their grazing. This was one pace away, one step away, okay? Where they cut it down tight with their grazing, 133 degrees, soil temp, one pace away, 87. Where did you still have moisture in the soil? 87. Where did you still have active biology? 87. Where was all of that shut down? One pace away. One pace away. So protecting soil temperature is one of the core reasons we want to have armor on the soil. And here's why. At 70 degrees soil temperature, not air temperature, but soil temperature, at 70 degrees, 100% of our soil moisture is available for growth of the plant and microbial support. It's all still there. At 100 degrees, 85% of our soil moisture is lost. At just 100 degrees, folks, think about how easy it is to hit 100 degrees soil temperature. And at 100 degrees, you now have only 15% of your moisture in the top 3 inches of soil left. That's it. Okay? The rest of it is evaporated. At 115 degrees, your microbes begin to break down, and they shut down. And at 140 degrees, you just pasteurized them. Okay? They're done, except for the ones that are deeper in the soil where it's cooler. But those that are in the first 3 to 4 inches, they're done. They're not cycling. They're not doing anything for you. This is a dysfunctional soil ecosystem. We see this, unfortunately, all the time. And again, I'm thankful for my neighbors because we get to show this, okay? And we just actually, we've been involved in a major research project that I'll share with you in the second session. And part of that is our neighbor that grows corn and grazes cattle agreed to also allow us to take measurements off of his farm, and we were taking the same measurements off of our farm, okay? This is exactly what we saw in our neighbor's cornfield. This is not his field, but this is what we saw. His fields didn't look any different than that this summer. Does that look like healthy soil to you? I agree. It's not soil anymore. It's dirt now, right? Okay. Look at it. Describe the picture on the left. Describe what you see. Tell me why this is not healthy soil. What are you seeing there? What? Capping, okay. Capping or crusting of the soil surface. Cracking. Okay, we've got crusting of the soil surface. We've got cracking. Right. We're already getting salt deposits. This is under center pivot, by the way. This is a watered cornfield under pivot, and it looks like that. Tell me how much of every time he circles that pivot, he tries to put on an inch. How much is he really putting on? Is he putting on, he's putting on an inch. Is he infiltrating an inch? Is he actually getting an inch of effective water for his corn? No. We've actually measured the water infiltration rates here. What do you think they might be in terms of inch per hour infiltration rate? Very close. He came in at 0.25 inches per hour. 0.25 inches per hour. So what is he doing every time he cranks that? Is it free to run pivots? Any of you have pivots? Is it free to run a pivot? Jerry, is it pretty cheap to run a pivot? Okay. So every time he has to crank up that pivot and operate that pivot and maintain that pivot, it's pretty costly, isn't it? He thinks he's putting on an inch. He's putting on 1/4 of an inch. That's it. And then the evidence is right there in that PED that one of my guys is holding in his hand. You look at that PED, you see the clear crusting on the surface, right? So that means that when that irrigation water, those drops are hitting the soil or actual rainfall is hitting the soil, what's happening? Almost immediately, when the water first starts falling on the soil with the velocity that it's going to hit that soil, what's happening? It's sealing it off. With that crust layer there, his soil is sealing off. It can't infiltrate. It's got to sit there a while before it infiltrates. And in our Mississippi summers, how long is it going to sit there? Not very long. It's going to evaporate very rapidly. But then what do you see beneath the crust, the surface? What do you see there? Or rather, I should maybe ask, what do you not see? Okay, no roots, no aggregation, no aggregation, none. This soil is plated, compacted, and guess what? our neighbor thinks he has great soil, and you can't convince him otherwise. He thinks he has some of the best soil in the Black Belt Prairie. This is what he's got in reality. So, water application, rainfall, hits the soil surface, evaporates back off. Air can't penetrate. What are two of the most critical things we need ourselves every day? Air and water, right? You know, we could have not eaten breakfast and lunch or even dinner tonight, and we're okay, right? We may feel hungry, but we're okay. But if we didn't drink all day, we're dehydrated, right? And we're going to pay for that very dearly, very quickly. And if we don't have air to breathe, we're paying for that in a very short period of time, right? What do our microbes need? The same thing we need. They're living, breathing organisms just like we are. So the soil needs to breathe, and the soil needs water always in that soil, infiltrating. So we've got to have all of that. All right, number 4, diversity. Diversity. Is this a problem in today's agriculture? It's a big problem. So, in this field, how many different plant species do you see? Okay, there's several, right? Okay, this is a multi-species mix. So there's several different plant species here. But in this field, how many different types of plants do you see? 1. And if you're the farmer and you see any other type of plant, what are you going to do? That's right. You're going to go do your best to kill it, right? Because whatever that other plant is a weed, and I got to get rid of it. So, but this is what we're doing. Who is the only creature on the face of the earth that creates a monoculture? Us. We're it. Nowhere else do you see a monoculture of anything. We're the only creature that does that. So, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, and this is from Jonathan's work for those of y'all that know Dr. Lundgren, but he's a world-renowned agroecologist and entomologist. So he went into that cornfield, he and his graduate students, and they looked at the life in that cornfield, and here's what they found. Okay, there you go, the sum total of the life in that cornfield. Then they went into that diverse field that I showed first and did the same thing. Look at the life there. Enormous difference between the two fields in terms of the life that they are supporting. Now, most farmers today, though, row crop farmers, if you showed them that picture, what's their immediate thought? Oh my God, I got to spray. They're going to eat my crop up, right? How many detrimental insects are there? Very, very few. How many beneficial insects are there in that picture? The vast majority. Okay? What Jonathan's work has found is that for every pest, if we're using regenerative practices so that we can attract the beneficials, for every pest, we'll have a minimum of 1,100 beneficials that'll eat those pests. Our problem is that when we spray insecticides, are they target organism specific? No. Do they kill the pest? Yeah. But guess what? They kill all of this other as well. Okay? So we have a loss, a net loss there. So here you go from Dr. Lundgren. Pretty profound if we're doing the job that we need to do. So on our farm, we haven't used any type of side, herbicide, insecticide, fungicide, anything like that, and I don't know how many years, at least 12 years, maybe longer. Not a single one. We don't have a need for them. This year, how many of you from the deep south in here? Okay. Do you have an armyworm problem?
This year, our neighbor lost their entire corn crop.
Okay, there you go. Armyworms were rampant, and basically, even I think from like as far west as Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and then all the way east, rampant armyworms this year. You heard everybody everywhere talking about armyworms. Our neighbors all around us got eat up by armyworms. We had some neighbors that sprayed as many as 4 to 5 times this year for armyworms. That's how many times we sprayed. Not once. Literally surrounding us, okay? 365, all the way around. Our neighbors had armyworms and sprayed. We did not spray even once. Why? Number one, we didn't need to, but why? Why?
They were all on your neighbor's farm.
That's pretty much.
They had plenty of food on their neighbor's farm.
Right. We have a high level of diversity, and I'll show you that in the second session, what we do have and what we've been able to build. But we have a high level of diversity, and was it that we could find no armyworms? So did we have 0 armyworms? No. I could find armyworms here and there, but there's called an economic threshold impact, right? They didn't even come close to economically threatening us. Not even close. And what we did was we fed our beneficials. We gladly fed our beneficials. And so we had no economic damage whatsoever. But all of our neighbors had a lot of economic damage, plus on top of that, they spent money on spraying, on insecticides, and on the application of those.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So is it that they're being out-competed, or that there's predation, or we had the same experience, like armyworms all around us.
Yep.
Didn't really notice an impact at all.
It's a combination of things, and when I get into the second session in the 3 rules, there's a rule called the rule of compounding, and that's what's going on. You're getting positive compounding effects. Your neighbors are getting negative compounding effects, but it all has to do with your context, the way you're managing versus the way your neighbors are managing. So it's three things primarily, but then it's a whole bunch of other things, little things up underneath that. But the 3 primary things are, yes, you've got more beneficials because you have the habitat for the beneficials to exist where the neighbors don't, or at least exist in enough numbers to do damage to the armyworms, okay? So you've got more beneficials that are preying on the armyworms. So again, I would doubt that y'all had 0 armyworms. You just didn't have enough to do damage, okay? The second thing is you've probably got, because of that, you probably also have greater diversity than your neighbors, and that diversity in those plant species that means you probably also have a stronger mycorrhizal population underneath the soil. And what you'll find is that as pests start to eat on plants, then that plant that's being eaten on immediately sends a signal to the roots and to the mycorrhizal fungi, which forms this superhighway interconnecting the roots of all the plants in those fields. And that plant says, there's somebody eating on me, we got to protect ourselves. So it sends a signal to the mycorrhizal fungi that then immediately shoots that signal out to every other plant in that field to say, produce volatile compounds that are going to deter the pest. Okay, so they won't like eating us. By the way, trees do the same thing. Did you know that? Have you noticed your cattle eating tree leaves? But they'll only eat them for a short period of time typically, and then they'll quit. It's because the trees are doing the same thing through their mycorrhizal pathway. As they're eating the leaves off those trees, grazing those leaves, then the tree that's being eaten on says, I'm being eaten on. It sends a signal to the mycorrhizal pathway. It starts producing volatile compounds, and that signal causes all the other neighboring trees to produce volatile compounds. And then shortly, they quit eating the leaves because now the leaves taste bitter to them. Wow. See the power of biology and the power of mycorrhizal fungi. But then the third thing is, because you've got all of that going for you, then 9 times out of 10, it also means that your plant Brix, B-R-I-X, your plant Brix level is going to be significantly higher than the exact same plant species in your neighbor's field, and insects cannot digest too much sugar. It ferments in their gut, produces alcohol, and it kills them, and they know that instinctively. So even the same plant, if it's high Brix versus low Brix, they'll always go after low Brix. And there's tons of research on this if you want to look it up. This has been documented for more than 40 years now in peer-reviewed research on the impact of Brix level in plants on pest and deterring pest or attracting pest. Low Brix plants attract pest. Basically, they're saying, I'm weak, come eat me. High Brix plants deter pest. And pests say, whoop, I'm going to avoid you because you'll kill me. Your sugars will kill me. So it's a delicate, intricate system. Our problem is that when we interfere with that, we create all of these imbalances that create the issues that we are encountering today. So the vast majority, folks, and this is what I've learned, and again, I was that university professor that did research on all these products and amendments and feed additives and everything else. And I was responsible for all of these companies' pamphlets and brochures that said, feed this or apply this and it'll make you X more profit per acre or per animal or whatever. Yes, I was a part of all of that for many years in academia. But what I can tell you is that we need virtually none of that if we do this thing right. Virtually none of it. Think about the input cost reduction, and we personally have experienced that, the significant input cost reduction, and then the impact on bottom line profitability that you have because of that. So here are the basic agronomic forage types. We've got warm season grasses, or C4s, warm season broadleaves, cool season grasses, the C3s, cool season broadleaves. And we've got the 4 functional plant class groups. We have grasses, forbs, legumes, and woody species. So in my pastures now, I want to see all 4. Does that surprise you? Now, many of you might, wait a minute, Alan. I can go along with the grasses and the legumes. These forbs, I don't know about, and those woody species, absolutely not. But yes, I want to see all 4. I don't want the forbs, I don't want the woodies to dominate, but I absolutely want all of these functional plant class groups. Why? Because it's diversity. Every one of those plant class groups produces an array of phytonutrients that are medicinal in nature, so they help self-medicate my livestock every day that they are out there grazing. And many of those things that we call forbs, and even many of the woody species, also have strong anti-parasitic properties. We haven't used chemical dewormers in many years now because we no longer need to. We can not use those because they are getting dewormed through their everyday diet, because they have the ability to eat some of these plants we call weeds, and they have the ability to browse along the brush and the trees and things like that. So we're using our plants to help medicate. And in the second session, I'm going to delve deeper into that one And I'm also going to relate to you, how many have heard of Dr. Fred Provenza? Okay, very good, the vast majority of you. Okay, Fred is, one of our technical advisors on our Understanding Ag team, but, Fred's work has clearly shown the incredible benefit of this diversity in our pastures and our rangeland, and not just benefit in terms of the nutrition, but benefit in terms of the medicinal value and the antiparasitic value. And his work has shown that given the option, an animal will eat from 30 to 60 different plant species every day. A little of a lot of them, and a bunch of some of the others. And if you watch them and observe, that'll change from day to day to day, the array of what they're eating. Why? Because they know better than we do what they need every day for their bodies. They're in tune with their bodies. The microbes in their gut are telling them what they need. So they're in tune with that. So we want all of this array. And another reason that we want this diversity, and this is just as important, beyond medicating and deworming our animals and providing a much higher level of nutrition, is that we are optimizing solar energy collection. So when we have this array of plants, and what I want is I want multiple stories. So I want low growing plants, I want intermediate growth plants, and I want tall growing plants, all in the same field, all at the same time. I want intermediate stories coming up from the soil. And the other thing that I want is many different types of leaf architecture. I don't want just one type of leaf architecture, because any time I have a single type of leaf architecture, we're leaking sunlight. We are losing sunlight. So it's critical if we want to maximize solar energy capture. And then what does that do for us? If we're maximizing the capture of solar energy, what's happening in our fields? We're growing more forage, period. Okay? And we're feeding more microbes beneath the soil surface, and we're cycling more nutrients, and we got a better water cycle going on here. So varied leaf architecture is critical, because now I've got different shaped solar panels working for me. Whatever angle that sun is at, I've got plant leaf material angled that way, capturing sunlight when I have varied leaf architecture. So that's another reason that we want a lot of diversity out there. The other reason is we want to optimize the soil microbial habitat and their population array. Plant diversity equals root diversity. Very important. And finally, because we want to optimize the animal's health. Livestock performance and health improves with greater forage diversity, and this is in all classes of livestock. It doesn't matter what it is. So we have multiple enterprises on our farms. We've got cattle, and in cattle we have cow-calf, stocker, and grass finisher. Then we have pastured pork, we have pastured lamb, we have pastured poultry, pastured layers, so on and so forth. And what we have found is that out of all of those species that are out there foraging and grazing, every one of them is healthier and performs better when we've got them in fields with much higher levels of diversity. They all do better, no matter the species and no matter the class. And again, I related to this just a moment ago, what Fred found. Cattle will select from 30 to 60 different plant species every day if given the opportunity. Why do most cattle producers, sheep producers, goat producers have to deworm routinely? Two primary reasons. What are they? Okay, lack of diversity, number one. I mean, that's what we're talking about right now. Okay, so lack of diversity. Number one, they're not able to self-medicate, self-deworm. Number two, what's the other reason? Okay, yeah, that's a third actually, but we're creating, more resistant Okay, all right. Grazing too low consistently, right? Grazing too low consistently. The vast majority of these internal parasites are located where on a plant?
Bottom 3 inches.
Right, the bottom 3 to 4 inches. So if we're allowing them to consistently get down there, they're always reinfesting themselves. We're the cause of our own demise. So the lack of diversity in most of our pastures and the fact that we're letting them graze too low consistently and continually get reinfested are our two main problems. That's why we have those issues, and we have to spend all this money on dewormers all the time. And it's not just the cost of the dewormers. Is it free to you to gather up your livestock in a corral and to treat them? What's the cost of that? You got the cost of labor, you got the cost of product, you got the shrink cost. How many of us count shrink cost? That's a huge cost if you're in the livestock business. I don't want to ever get an animal up until I absolutely have to, because every time I get an animal up, I'm experiencing, no matter how well I handle them, what do you think is the average percent shrink? Whenever you have to get them up and do anything to them, when you pin them, what do you think is the average percent shrink? Hey, it's going to be 6 to 10%. 6 to 10%, folks, if you're really measuring that. So every time you have to get them up, you just lost 6 to 10%, and then you got to put it right back on again. Why are we doing that to ourselves? We're taking money out of our own pocket, thinking we're doing the right thing. We've been taught that's the right thing to do, right? That's what we've been taught. Who is deworming your deer? Who is deworming the elk, the antelope? Who's doing it?
Plants.
Okay, and I know that, the Native Americans, went down to the local co-op and bought some Sidectin. No. We all know that didn't happen, okay? So nobody dewormed them then. Nobody deworms them now. Do they have parasites? Yeah. They're not immune to them. So why aren't our deer and our elk and our antelope and wild bison and all of this just constantly dropping over dead from heavy parasite load? Why?
They're not eating low and they're moving on.
Okay, they don't care about your fences, right? Okay? They eat far more plant species every day than your cows can. You've got your cows, your sheep, your goats, whatever, confined within a fence, and they can only eat what you have allowed to grow there. That's all they have. That's the only option they have. But your deer go in and out. They go wherever they want, and they're going to browse here and browse there, and they have the option and the opportunity to balance their diet and to self-medicate and self-deworm every day. So we want polycultures. If we're planting annuals, we want to plant polycultures. If we have perennial pastures and rangeland, we want to manage to encourage diversity. This is a cover crop mix for grazing, and there's many, many different options here. Cover crops after small grains, winter biennials, and even we have producers doing 3 crops in 2 years. For instance, a program like this, silage corn followed by cereal rye, followed by soybeans. So you can harvest 3 crops in a 2-year period. All right, so that was number 4. Number 5, living roots in the soil. Living roots in the soil. Why? What's the benefit? Okay, root exudates. What in the heck is a root exudate? Why is it important? Okay, it's essentially nourishment for soil microbes, right? Plants produce root exudates and spew those root exudates out to feed the microbes in the soil. Why do plants do that? Why do plants feed microbes? Okay, they need the microbes to feed them, right? I call it the world's oldest bartering system, okay? The plants feeding the microbes and the microbes feeding the plants. Pretty beautiful system. Living roots, yes or no? Now, I drove here from Mississippi earlier this week. Went by an awful lot of farms. How much of that do you think I saw between Myrtle Beach and Starkville, Mississippi? Way too much. I saw lots and lots and lots of bare ground. And where I saw, what do you think I saw in most of the pasture land I drove by? About like this carpet here, okay? I mean, they were already feeding hay, everything else. There was nothing for cows to eat all the way from Mississippi to South Carolina. And let me ask those of you that live in that region that I just said, did we lack rainfall this year? No, we did not, did we? But more than 90% of the pastures I drove by looked like this. And we had probably one of the best summer rainfall years that we've had in the Deep South in a long time. And the most consistent rains all summer that we've had in a long time. But it looked like this. So, we got to have living roots. By the way, most crop fields across North America, how long of the year do they actually have living roots in the ground? It's up there on the slide so you can cheat and answer. There you go, less than a third of the year, okay? Think about that. The vast majority of the row crop ground in the continental U.S. has living roots in the ground less than a third of the year. Living roots equal microbial activity. They equal energy flow. Again, capture of photosynthetic activity. This is a video of a plant root leaking or spewing out root exudates into the soil. Look at that. That plant's pretty serious about it, isn't it? It really wants to be fed. I mean, it's spewing out a lot of exudates. So this is what we're trying to do. Like the work of Dr. Elaine Ingham and others, we're trying to create a highly functional, complete soil food web. And it is all about soil health. Now, what do you see in this soil? Describe this soil to me. Do you see a crusted layer on top? Is it cracking on top? Is it aggregated or plated? It's aggregated. I call it black cottage cheese look, right? I want my soil to look like black cottage cheese. So it's highly aggregated. Do you have a lot of pore space? Are there earthworms? Yep, there's earthworms there. You've got tons of pore space. So what happens when it rains on that soil? Soaks right up, right? So it just soaks right in. This is healthy soil. That's what we're trying to, so it can infiltrate water and retain water. It can hold up traffic. So whether you're having to push machinery across this soil or whether you're grazing it, and if it's been wetter, it's still going to hold up equipment. It's going to hold up cattle or other livestock. But that other soil will not. You'll sink your equipment and your cattle will pug the heck out of it. So think about that for a minute. most people would think, okay, this highly dense, compacted, plated soil, when it gets really wet, well, it should hold everything up and it shouldn't pug or anything like that, right? Because it's just, man, it's like a brick. It shouldn't dent. In this soil, man, it should sink. Them cows should sink to their knees when it's wet. Isn't that how we think? But it's the exact opposite. The exact opposite. This holds them up. It doesn't pug. It holds up equipment. Carbon sequestration. We got a lot more carbon sequestration going on here. We've got total greenhouse gas emission reduction, less weed and pest pressure. And then the final one, and then we'll take a break, come back for our second session, animal impact. Animal impact. This, if you want to make the most rapid progress with regenerative agriculture, this sixth one is crucial. Animal impact is very, very important. And the second session this afternoon, that's what we're going to be focused on, that animal impact. How do we do it? How do we do it well? How do we do it profitably? Okay? How do we make it work? So animal impact is something that we've absolutely got to think about. This is on our farm in Alabama, and these are finishers here. So that's a mob of about 600 head of grass fats that we're finishing. And we move feeders to our finishing herd when they're about 8 weight to 850 weight. Then they go into the finishing herd at that and stay in the finishing herd till they're done and ready to harvest. So this is nothing but finishers here. So about 600 head of finishers. And this is about the density that we graze every day on finishers, on fats. And we achieve 52 weeks out of the year 90+% USDA choice and up. Grazing like that, exactly like that. We're moving them 3 to 4 times a day under a single strand of polywire. But this is the density that we're looking for. So what we're trying to do is simulate nature. This not only benefits the animals, but it also benefits the livestock beneath the soil, those microbes. It greatly increases our plant species diversity. And in the second session, we're going to talk about specifically why and how does it do all of that. How do we produce all of those benefits? We work a lot with bison ranchers as well. And this is the Standing Butte Ranch near Pierre, South Dakota. This is a herd of 3,000 bison under a single strand of polywire. So we are grazing many bison herds now throughout the U.S. and Canada, moving them daily under a single strand of polywire. We were told repeatedly by bison ranchers this could not be done. Bison will not do that, and they will not respect a single strand of polywire, and you can't put bison in a mob. We were told that over and over, and I was thinking, wait a minute, historical ecological perspective, bison used to live in pretty tight mobs and move in pretty tight mobs and in huge population numbers. What are you talking about? Bison won't herd up. That's a man-made deal. That's our fault. So we actually had to retrain them into their herding instinct. But we've been able to do that and move them under these single strands of polywire. And it's making an enormous difference in both the health of their soils and their rangeland, but also in the health of the bison. The bison are far healthier now. These same ranches used to manage their bison very extensively. As a matter of fact, their philosophy in the beginning was rip up all interior fences, don't have anything but perimeter, and just let the bison, because bison somehow know what to do because they're, quote, wild, so they know what to do, and let's just let them roam inside our fence, and they'll know how to manage the grasses and graze properly, and they won't overgraze. Well, guess what happened? They overgrazed severely, okay, and they ripped up the ranches. So now they had to reinstall, okay, interior fencing that they ripped out initially. But of course, we're using a lot of the temporary polywire as well, and even temporary water for the bison. So this is now working very well, and it's amazing how much better the bison are. You know, stock density can do a lot of really good things for you, and we're going to talk about it a lot more in detail in the second session, why and how it does that. But I can use multiple species to achieve stock density impact. If I want a really high degree of trample, this is my species of choice, right there. A chicken will not leave a blade of grass untrampled, okay? So we carry everything from 5,000 to 8,000 laying hens, so that's what you're seeing there. So those are our laying hens, and we move them daily, and we have a radius of impact, and so every day we move their houses that you see there, their own skids, we move them to the middle of the next radius of impact. But by golly, if you want a good degree of trample, you put a bunch of chickens out there, and they will do it, and the results are phenomenal. If I could run chickens on every acre, I would, because of how rapidly they improve soil and improve land. And boy, do they leave behind a lot of fertility. It's amazing the fertility that they create there, as well as that biological impact. So we have a lot of visitors pretty much every week. We get visitors come to our ranches, and we love to show people around and so forth and share with them what we're doing. But so these three guys are from Louisiana, so next door to us here. But they wanted to come see what they were doing, and inevitably, none of these three have chickens or have ever had chickens. They're all cattlemen. But inevitably, whenever people come, they love the chickens. They want their picture taken with the chickens, okay? And they just stay there. There's something about those chickens that it draws people in. And we have guardian dogs. You see one of them, Ella, that's Ella back there that you see. So we use guardian dogs. We don't use electric net fencing or anything like that. Our chickens can roam, and they're out 24/7. They're never completely enclosed at all, even at night. The guardian dogs protect them. We have plenty of sharp-tooths. We have coyotes and bobcats and fox and raccoons and on and on and on. And we have lots of raptors. We have bald eagles, and we have red-tailed hawks and falcons and so forth. We have next to no predation in our chickens because of those guardian dogs. They live with the chickens 24/7, 365, and they think they're just a big, hairy chicken. And it's amazing. So we have multiple guardian dogs. They assign themselves shifts. So you'll see some of them sleeping and some of them actively guarding, and then they swap. They know, and then some of them will take a break and walk up to the shop or whatever at the farm shop there and come visit us. And then it's almost like they have a clock on, and they're like, oops, my shift. And they turn around and they go back to the chickens. Now, I don't know how they do that and decide that. I don't care. I'm just glad that they do. But they literally assign their own shifts and determine, who's going to be guarding when. And even with the raptors, so with the eagles, the hawks, all of that, what's amazing is that they'll see an eagle perched over there or a hawk over there watching the chickens, and as soon as they see them, like a beeline, they're taking off barking and growling at that eagle or that hawk, and they take off and fly away. So it's astounding what these guardian animals can do. And then this is one of our clients, a grazing dairy up in Cold Springs, Minnesota. They go out and graze every single day in between the morning and evening milking. He is milking just under 100 head. He and his wife, and they got 2 young kids, and they manage it all themselves, love their life, and make an outstanding living. And they're putting it on a commodity milk truck. They're not even selling this into some specialty milk market. They're putting it on a commodity truck, getting commodity milk price, and making an outstanding living on just under 100 head of cows. Because of the way they're managing, they have very low cost. They don't have all the heavy metal. They don't have to grow all the crops and all of this other stuff and then go out and plant it, harvest it, spray it, put it up, feed it back. They're not feeding all of that other stuff. They're not feeding the mouths of equipment. So because of what they're doing, and they have developed very highly diverse pastures, that's perennials that you saw those cows going on, lactating, milking full time, grazing perennial pastures every day and doing quite well on that. What was the other thing that you noticed there that's very unique? Say again?
Calves are still on.
Okay. Wow. How many dairy producers do that?
None.
Very few. But we've got more and more doing it now. Why? Why would you do this? Most dairy producers do what?
Feed their calves.
Yank them off shortly after birth, right? Okay? Never to see mama again. Why are these guys keeping calves on mama? These are heifers. The steers do come off and are sold, but why do these stay on mama? Why do the girls stay on the mothers? Okay, there you go. Training and epigenetic development. Never discount epigenetics, and we'll talk more about that in the second session. And we're going to delve really deeply into epigenetics tomorrow because it's critically important. But these calves, what we're finding, if they stay on their mothers, then they produce far better milk components for life. Their longevity, the number of lifetime lactations, is significantly longer. This guy's averaging 11 plus lactations out of dairy cows. Think about that. How many beef producers are averaging 11 plus lactations? Now, in conventional dairy, what is the average number of lactations? It's under 3. Under 3. Okay? He's averaging 11.
Averaging, that means there's some.
Right. There's 16, 17-year-old cows in there. Okay? Still calving. In a dairy. In a dairy. And they have far less, so that obviously tells you they have far less reproductive issues, right? His other benefit by doing it that way and developing them epigenetically is that they produce far more females than they need to do their own replacements. So they're able to sell very high quality dairy replacement heifers to other dairy producers who can't produce enough replacement heifers for themselves because of their conventional management. So they're able to do that and get another revenue stream that most dairy producers don't have. And in every measure, they are better. Reproductive status, better. Longevity, better. Milk components, better. Somatic cell count, better. MUNs, better. Feet and leg problems, none. None. It's gone away. Plus, what is not happening? What also are they not having to do? Plant and harvest crops. What else?
They don't have to feed their calves.
They're not having to feed all this TMR. What else? Manure management. Boy, isn't that a huge one. For most dairies, manure management, waste management is, just a huge problem. They don't have a waste management problem. Okay? Not a bit at all. So they've solved the vast majority of the problems that most dairies face on a day in, day out basis and are far more profitable. Think about it, making a good living. I'm not talking about scraping by. As a couple, making a really good living off of under 100 cows. And they're not overworked. their seasonal milking as well.
Do they still supplement in the milking barn, presumably?
They do just a little bit of supplementation in the milking parlor, and what they do for that is we have them now planting highly complex cover crops rather than just monoculture corn silage or wheatlage or oatlage or something like that. Absolutely, and for silage. Okay, so what we have found is that if you plant highly diverse cover crops, we can go in and harvest that for silage and feed that just like you would the corn silage, and it's actually far more nutritious and far better for them, so it's a far better feed stuff. And you're benefiting your soil health because you have the diversity there from that, right? So these are dairy cows grazing diverse covers. And what we have found here, and we've done this over and over, is that compared to cows that are being fed a TMR, we see very, very little difference putting them in here and grazing this in their production if you do this right. And then finally, this is stockpiled diverse cover crop mix. This is up in Minnesota. This is Dan standing out in his field, and this is the feed quality as it's standing there today. That was in the winter, taken in the winter in Minnesota. That's the feed quality. Look at that. RFQ 179, TDN 65, crude protein 17%. That's what his cattle had to eat as winter stockpile, and that's summer C4s that are out there producing a really good winter stockpile. So adaptive grazing equals feeding cattle plus feeding soil biology. We'll delve a lot more into this in the second session, but modern fencing technology, you know, we use a lot of that today. Luckily, we have outstanding temporary fencing technologies today that we can use. They're low cost and highly portable. So we'll talk about strategies to use that in the second session. So with that ends our first session. We're going to have a 30-minute break and come back in. I'll be here if you want to ask questions in between.